Hello there guys and welcome to another episode of Genuine Chit-Chat. This week I am joined by Moxie LaBouche. Now Moxie is the host and creator of the Your Brain on Facts podcast, and she has also released a book also called Your Brain on Facts. So there's a lot of trivia, a lot of fun stories, crazy information and stuff that goes on in this chat. So just a couple of little bullet points before we get started. We basically speak of, as I said, loads of different things. There's not one subject that we specifically stick to, but a couple of bullet points are the mantis shrimp, card games, why Moxie wrote the book and started a podcast, regional dialects of England, musicals, the difference between the American school system and the English school system, sort of years and grading wise and things, when Moxie got struck by lightning and how that experience was for her, and then lots of other cool stories like people throwing themselves off Niagara Falls in barrels and that sort of stuff. There are loads of tangents that kind of go down one way and then suddenly change course, and there's certain thoughts that I was gonna say and then the conversation goes in a completely different direction. I didn't get to say it, but it's a really, really fun podcast, and if you're one clamoring for something that just sounds like two people having a casual chat, this is exactly what this kind of conversation is. Before the chat gets started, there'll be a quick promo for Room Podcast. Anyone will know Aidan Rosewell has been on the podcast before when he's speaking about his other podcast, Days of My Life. I have also appeared in 2 episodes of the Room Podcast with my voice acting debut. The first episode of season 2 called All Roads Lead to Room. I was in that in sort of a smaller role. And then in the Jen and the Blob episode, I played the Blob, which is quite an interesting voice for me to do. So I really recommend you guys check that out. There are links in the description to the Room Podcast, and I've also recently appeared on Max Byrne's mandatory Marvel and DC show, talking about the DC comic The Killing Joke to Batman. All the links to that are in the description, and I'll go a bit more into that later. So just to clarify, the chat is about to start, but right at the end of the chat I'll come back saying what's to come in the following weeks, other things that I've appeared on, and what happened in Star Wars Comics and Canon, which is my other show. So there's the kind of things you can look forward to right at the very end of the podcast, but that's enough rambling from me, so the chat's about to get started after the promo. Thanks as always for tuning in, guys, I really appreciate it, and yeah, talk to you then.
Nobody told me love could hurt like this. Remember the night when we first kissed? Do you? Do you?
It can be a struggle to keep positive, given everything that's happened.
And while we were connected, we could forget the darkness.
And in the beauty that I saw when I turned, I forgot myself. I lost myself.
If I don't watch my feet, they may well lift off the ground.
This is quite exciting, really. I feel like I'm at the start of a great adventure.
This is just like some kind of movie.
That we are being looked after, and that we are loved, always.
For more information about Room and how you can support the show, find us on Twitter at RoomPodcast1. Thanks for listening. See you around.
Are you ready to die?
Welcome to Genuine Chit-Chat, where we have honest conversations with interesting people. And I'm your host, Mike Burton. And I'm joined today with Moxie LaBouche. Welcome, Moxie. It's absolutely great to have you on the show.
I'm so glad to be here today. Thank you.
No worries at all. And you have an incredibly interesting podcast that I hadn't heard of until you sort of got into contact with myself, but then when I've been listening to it, I've become addicted. It's the perfect length and the perfect amount of facts that anyone could want. So do you want to just sort of tell people about your podcast a little bit?
Thank you so much. My show is Your Brain on Facts. It is your weekly half hour of things you never knew. Everything from the history of nursing to the origin of the Vulcan salute to the theft of Canada's strategic maple syrup reserve. And I always like to let that phrase hang in the air, because first people have to grapple with the idea of strategic maple syrup reserve, and then the fact that someone stole a bunch of it.
That's incredible. That's a very perfect taste of what kind of stuff you can expect on your Brain on Facts. And sort of, if we just start with that, and we'll get onto all the other things in a moment, what made you specifically start a podcast?
Well, I have lots of extraneous bonus facts in my head, and they will just fall out of my mouth unbidden, and often in inappropriate circumstances, like in the middle of arguments and things of that nature. And the customers I'm ringing up at the grocery store don't necessarily want to hear about the prehistoric ground sloth that used to redistribute avocado seeds, and that's why the pits are so huge. They just want me to ring up the damn avocado and let them leave. So my husband got me into listening to podcasts because, like a lot of people, I had basically like all the misconceptions about podcasts, that I didn't know where to find them. I wasn't 100% sure what they were. I didn't know if they'd be any good. How do I find one I like? I kind of had this impression you had to stop and pay attention to them, which is not a combo I'm real strong on. But then my husband played an episode of Unorthodox in the car for me, which refers to itself as the universe's leading Jewish podcast. And I recommend Jew and Gentile alike should definitely check it out. And I'm like, okay, no, that's pretty good. Put on something else. And then I found things like Good Job Brain, which was a quiz show that unfortunately is defunct. No Such Thing as a Fish. Yeah, anything that springs from QI must be gold. And I was like, well, I could do one of these without, of course, ever looking, into what actually goes into it. I'm like, yeah, I could do one of those. And then I would have a safe way to vent all of these excess facts. The trouble is, in researching and writing a 7-page script each week, it just puts more shit in my brain, which is then more stuff that I can't keep track of. My brain is essentially an encyclopedia, but all of the pages have been torn out and they're strewn around the room being shredded by squirrels.
That's a very good way of putting it. I mean, with myself, I've got not anywhere near as many bonus facts as you've got, but, when I talk to people about random things, I did like a quiz with some friends the other night, and I've got a nickname now for one group of friends that's my girlfriend's sort of friends, and I'm called Mammal Mike now because I did 10 questions about mammals. Well, I did 10 questions about animals. 7 of them were about animals, and most of them are like, what colour is octopus blood? That's obviously not a mammal, but I've always known it's blue. But I thought that was a kind of vaguely common knowledge, and it's not. There's the mantis shrimp that's got, seeds over 4 times more colour.
The mantis shrimp is amazing.
So exciting.
Yeah.
It's one of the most cool animals on the whole planet. It can see over 4 times more colours than humans can. It's like a little punch is like the force of a bullet or something similar to that.
Yeah, the cavitation bubble that its punch creates is actually what kills its prey.
Yeah, exactly.
It creates like a shock wave, and that's what kills the prey. It doesn't hit it, but it moves so fast it creates a negative space in the water, a cavitation bubble, and that bubble collapsing. And it even makes a spark when it does it, which is like bizarre to make a spark underwater. And that cavitation bubble collapsing is what actually kills its prey. So there's a really great webcomic called The Oatmeal, and he did.
That's where I heard it.
Yeah,
that's
big
where
long write-up.
I love The Oatmeal.
Yeah.
See, there's the difference in me and you. We read the same thing, but I could barely remember. I can mantis shrimp, 4 times more colour, strong punch. That's what I remembered, and that's about it. Whereas you're like, got it all.
Well, I had 1 or 2 other things, but that's about it. But having had colourful pictures definitely helped.
Oh yes, yeah. The Oatmeal is. If anyone hasn't been to The Oatmeal, you need to. I mean, also some of the card games like Exploding Kittens. It's one of my favourite card games ever.
Maybe I just had like a bad round of it. I've only played it once. I was kind of unimpressed with it.
Really?
Now, Cyanide and Happiness, their game, Joking Hazard, that one is never not funny. It's as good as Cards Against Humanity was when we all first started playing it and before we all kind of got bored and memorized all the cards.
Yeah. That's exactly what happened with us. We got the Cards Against Humanity and then several expansion packs and things. We played it a lot, and then it got to a point where there's just certain cards that just aren't, in my opinion, not funny at all. There's one which just serfdom. And it's like most people I know, including myself, I always forget, don't know what serfdom means. And then when you have certain things like that, or there's certain ones that are brilliant and always win, sort of anything to do with cancer or
not giving a shit
like
about
that.
the Middle East.
Exactly.
You can usually pair that with something. And some of them rely so much on shock value that after you've seen it 3 times, it has lost all of its shock value, and that was really all it had going for it.
Yeah.
And when I used to produce burlesque shows, I did nerdlesque, so we did shows on Jim Henson and Archer and Game of Thrones and all kinds of stuff, and I would make a custom Cards Against Humanity expansion pack. So our version here at the house is pretty unique because I have one copy of all of the different expansion packs to go along with the different burlesque shows that we made.
That is incredible. I mean, I'm very envious of that. But yeah, with the Cyanide and Happiness thing, 'cause I've heard of that game coming out, but I mean, me and the guys haven't played card games for ages because obviously lockdown, but we were kind of getting a bit tired of certain games. And yeah, as you say, Cards Against Humanity gets boring after a while. And there are, with Exploding Kittens, I think it does kind of depend on certain things. Like my girlfriend wasn't as much of a fan of it when she first played it, but then she played it with loads of people who already knew exactly what they were doing. So it's kind of one of those things where it can, I don't know, what's the Cyanide and Happiness thing in brief?
It basically, like, each card is one panel of a 3-panel comic, and you just try to, from your hand, make the best 3-panel comic. And of course, because it's Cyanide and Happiness, it's a same sort of sense of humor as Cards Against Humanity.
That's amazing. I'm going to have to look into it because I love their comics and things. So yeah, I'll definitely look into that. Thanks for the recommendation. Looking back then, so obviously you had your podcast and things, and I mean, the reason I started my podcast in the similar vein was just that everyone tells me I talk far too much, and I'm always, if I meet people new, I just want to know everything about them. Like my favorite thing in the world is talking with someone about what they're passionate about, and then you see their eyes light up because they're excited, and then when they talk so fast, they can almost tripping over their words because they're excited to tell you. That's like my favorite thing in the world. So I started in podcasting, and then it gets, certain individuals like, oh, this person says quite interesting, and then you research them and you're like, what? Like yourself, it's just like, okay, you've got the resume of like each bullet point we could probably have an entire podcast on. So I'm sure you'll be able to return. But you're also an author, so I don't know if you want to discuss that as well.
Yes, a newly minted author. As of when we were recording a week ago today, the Your Brain on Facts book came out. The full title is Your Brain on Facts, Things You Didn't Know, Things You Thought You Knew, and Things You Never Knew You Never Knew. I have no idea why the publisher went for that title because it takes up half of the front cover. But one thing that there was still room on the front cover for, and I will be proud of this forever, I got a blurb from Mangesh Hattikudur, one of the founders of Mental Floss.
I saw that.
So right on the front of my book is a blurb from one of the guys who created Mental Floss. And if you ever listen to his podcast with the other co-founder, Will, Part-Time Genius, his nickname is Mango. And my publisher is Mango Publishing. And we earlier this year lost my bestest buddy, Kat, to cancer. And I'm like, okay, Facebook fam, keep your eyes out. It's kitten time. I'm getting the urge. And then sure enough, there is a tiny little orange tabby kitten named Mango. And I'm like, well, get in the car. You're obviously, and I get to go pick him up this evening. And I'm like, so psyched about that. So yeah, I just had to bring the kitten up into the conversation too.
I'm so jealous. I mean, unfortunately, where myself and Megan are in this flat, we can't have any fuzzy animals. We've got a tortoise, so she likes cuddles. Not
really the same.
No,
your tortoise actually likes cuddles.
Yeah, I swear. She's called Wicket, named after a Star Wars character Wicket, but she's female. So, and I'm a massive Star Wars nerd. And she's 1 year old.
I like that. All of that scans. All of that was good. That it was Wicket, but because it was a female, you did Wicket, and then that makes me think of Keeping Up Appearances. It's Wicket. Dear, it's Bouquet. And I also like that in your particular parlance that you said tortoise and not tortoise, because when I hear the people speaking the Kings and saying tortoise, I'm like, and you say we talk stupidly. There's certain regions of England they say tortoise instead of tortoise.
There's a couple of weird little there's certain twangs. I mean, when people hear me speak, some Americans think I'm very well spoken, and I think I'm not really. But compared to some people in England, like we call them chavs, generally, or people unfortunately often in the lower parts of the socioeconomic ladder often speak in a certain way. Unfortunately, it's not for everyone, but especially around Southampton and things, people when they speak in this sort of dialect, half the things they say, I can't actually understand what they're saying because there's so much slang. But then you go up north, and it's ironic with England that the further north you go is more synonymous with, in America, the further down south you go.
They're flipped. Yeah. And my husband and I watch a lot of British TV, so we're more acclimated both to the culture and to the accents. Like we cannot go a day without a clip from Mock the Week or Cats Does Countdown or something like that. So also there's a YouTube channel, Tom Scott. He and 3 friends from Yorkshire do different little panel shows together. So I can pick up the Yorkshire accent like really quick. The average American really can only identify a couple of accents because somehow your tiny little island has dozens of really distinct accents on it. God knows how. And then my British friend explained it to me. It's because you used to not leave your village. You used to be born and raised and die within 10 miles, a 10-mile radius. So people, the villages were really insulated, and that's how you got all these different accents. But we're used to hearing received pronunciation and Cockney, end of list.
Yes, that is.
So if you don't sound like Cockney, then you must sound like received pronunciation. We really only have the two settings, the average American.
It's literally, it's almost just like, it's either Downton Abbey or Cockney, and that's almost all what Americans think the British accent is, and it's definitely not the case. But
you can blame Dick Van Dyke for that.
Yeah,
you can absolutely blame Dick Van Dyke for that.
I saw Mary Poppins for the first time only about 4 or 5 years ago. I think I maybe watched it when I was really young as a kid, but I couldn't remember it. And I watched it, and I was like, what accent is he doing? And then obviously it tells you pretty soon, and I'm like,
he sounds like a Pakistani who's had a mild stroke.
I know, it's like, has he ever heard anyone on the whole planet even speak English compared to I remember watching it.
That was like back in the mid-'60s. You would have to have flown someone over to hear a foreign accent or get like some newsreels from World War II or something. You know, it's not like how you and I can be talking right now, and you know, I could learn all about your accent. So I'm not making excuses for him. It was inexcusable. And then they make a second movie, and instead of, you know, casting some perfectly nice person who lives within the sound of the bell of that one particular church, which means that you're Cockney, otherwise you're just an East Ender. Then we get Lin-Manuel Miranda, and I'm like, okay, I love him, but we're making the same mistake a second time here.
I recognize the name. Was he in Hamilton?
He's the Hamilton guy, yeah.
Weirdly enough, I only found out his name literally 10 minutes before our podcast, because I was in the loo, and then I was just on social media, Reddit actually, I think, and I saw Hamilton coming to Disney Plus and things, and my girlfriend loves musicals, so I'm trying to watch more musicals and things. She hasn't seen Hamilton. I saw this thing about, it's censored, blah blah blah, and I looked into it, and the guy said, they've cut out saying fuck 3 times, and that makes it go from basically R-rated to PG-13, and the guy, that's his name. So I would never have known his name, and I haven't seen the second Mary Poppins. It's weird when things like that happen. Well, I'm just waiting until the day after it comes out on Disney Plus, when it'll be on Pirate Bay and I can actually get my hands on it, because that's the only way I'm going to be able to see Hamilton, because the tickets are like $200 and they're sold out months in advance. And I'm like, well, yes, I'd like to be part of this cultural phenomenon. Ain't going to happen, Captain. Yeah, we've been in a similar boat, like with musicals and things. Like, we've seen Book of Mormon a couple of times, which is incredible, and there's loads of other ones that me and Megan are trying to see more of, but obviously this year they all basically have been moved to the next year, or Lion King has been moved to 2022, which is going to be a Christmas gift for Megan, but that's going to very far in the future now. But we spoke about Hamilton, and she isn't the biggest fan of rap, and it's like the rap musical essentially.
Yeah.
And I really want to see it because I love I like music from every genre, including death metal, classical, rap, anything. But she's more specific. So we were like, do we want to, whenever we end up going to America, do we want to try and spend that hundreds of pounds to see a musical in a genre of music you probably won't like? And as we were kind of figuring this out, it got announced obviously only a little while ago that Hamilton was coming. And it was like, oh, problem solved. Nice and easy.
Well, you can, apart from, the soundtrack being available, John Krasinski, the actor from The Office and whatnot, had started a YouTube channel, Some Good News, which he then 8 episodes in sold to CBS Viacom, the bastard. But there was one bit where like a little girl had tickets for Hamilton. She's like 9 years old and she's really looking forward to going and wasn't going to get to go, obviously. And he got like the whole Broadway cast on this Zoom call to do like the first song from Hamilton for her. So if you want to, and I had never heard any of it, because I don't see the point of listening to a soundtrack from something I haven't seen, because it won't make any sense. I don't have context. But I'm like, okay, this sounds pretty good. I can see how we could make a hip hop history musical and make it work, but I wasn't going to take any of it in until I could actually see it. Unlike my husband, who, the theme for Flash Gordon, the Queen song, with all the bits of dialogue from the movie in it. My husband knew that by rote, but he had never actually seen Flash Gordon. And I'm like, how did that not just drive you to watch it because none of this shit makes any sense to you. It can't possibly. I've seen the movie 100 times and I know that it won't make any sense to you. And I finally, just a couple of years ago, got to show it to him. He's like, oh, that's where that line is. I'm just, oh. What am I going to do with you?
I presume you are, because I'm this kind of individual, and I lose sleep on this sort of thing quite a lot, where if I read a lot of Star Wars comics and books and things. If I read something and I come to a word that I do not recognise, I immediately am straight on Google, Wikipedia, whatever, trying to define the word and figure it out. And then I end up going down rabbit holes and things of like word origins and all kinds of other stuff. And it was like, I end up doing that. That's how I know I say so many facts. In the presence of you, it's so little facts. But in the presence of anyone else, so many facts. Yes, I'm very adverse. Are you like that, where it's just as soon as, or like if you question your own fact and you're like, wait a minute, and then you have to go and look online to make sure your facts align so it doesn't all smush together?
Yeah, I mean, or like you say something that you're really confident in, but the other person doubts, and now you doubt, like
Yes.
this thing that you've known your whole life. You know, are penguins birds or fish? Well, they're birds, and then the other person looks at you and like, they are birds, aren't they? You're like, no, I'm pretty. Oh, Google it. I'm like, okay, no, they are birds. Why did you look at me like that? You know.
I get exactly that. My girlfriend does get sometimes annoyed at me because if she says something is something and I'm like, I'm pretty certain it's not. And then I'm like, okay, I don't want to argue. Let's look it up. But often she and certain other people take it in a way of me going, oh no, I think you're wrong. I'm trying to prove you right. It's like, no, I think I'm wrong, but I won't remember this unless I look it up. I'm quite a visual learner. So if I see something written down or on my phone or wherever, if I see the fact, I'll remember the fact written down better than it in conversation.
Yeah, so you're not actualing them. You're just like, let's go on this learning journey together.
Yeah, I do it with my own thing. If I say something and someone, like a little fact, like at work, I said about the octopus blood being blue, and then someone said, I thought it was green. And I was like, well, I thought, I'm certain it was blue. Like 5 seconds ago, I would have bet money it's blue. Now You've made me forget. Now I'm just go, so, oh my God, have I been telling people my entire life that the octopus blood is blue and it's not? And then you look online, oh no, I am. I am right, it's okay.
That was the exact sensation I was referring to, yeah. Horseshoe crabs also have blue blood.
That's interesting.
It was Vulcans that had green blood.
I see.
Just tossing that out there.
I think the only other fact I know about crabs is, because I've seen them, is in Lanzarote, one of the Canary Islands, there is a cave full of blind crabs that are white, that glow in the dark. And I think it's the only place you can, to my knowledge, it's the only place you can find them.
Well, yeah, you would do, because in the caves where there's no sunlight, they don't need to have any pigmentation.
And then over time, they just breed. It's that whole, how evolution generally works is, but without having to delve too far into it, but when they live longer, because obviously they wouldn't need to see anything when they're in the cave. So then the brain stops needing to fuel the visual cortex, and over generations and generations, eventually they don't need to see. I want to preface that because I was like, once I come on those doubts, I was like, I'm pretty certain they are, but Moxie knows much more about these sort of things than me. So if I
really wish you would stop thinking that I have like this ridiculous amount of knowledge. Like I said off mic, I know a non-zero amount of things about many things. Not enough to be an expert. So I've been, trying to get on a lot of podcasts because I got this book I got to shill, and it's just fun. But I've been punching above my weight with a lot of these emails and like people who have podcasts that also have PhDs and history and stuff. And I'm like, I'm going to try to convince them to let me come on their show. For me, who is not an expert in anything by any stretch of the imagination. And sometimes it works, and sometimes the person's just like, get the fuck out of here.
Well, I don't have...
Three-time community college dropout. Kind of hard to convince PhDs to share their podcast space with you.
Yeah, I don't even have anything on that. I went to college, which... college over here is not college where you guys are, because college where you guys are is university over here. So I was in education till I was 18. I don't know what that... I always get confused with the American school system, because you've got... high school.
You think our thing's confusing. Imagine how your thing looks to us. A levels, O levels. I've watched a lot of British TV, and I have not been able to suss out how the British education system is laid out. I heard I had to look up GCSE. Now granted, I could have looked all of this up, but sometimes I just like being frustrated. But and then, how you have different GCSEs in different subjects, which sounds like it would be a college major, but it's actually like a high school thing. Okay, so generally, here's a broad overview, and it varies a lot from state to state and even from within the individual states. But you've got 5 or 6 years of elementary school or primary school, starting about age 5 with kindergarten. And then 3 or 4 years of middle school, and then 4 years of high school. The 4 years of high school is pretty much universal. Where elementary goes into middle, that can change a lot by state. And then you've got your 4 years of high school. You are supposed to stay in high school until you're a legal adult and can just, fuck off home. Or you have graduated. If you need to leave school early for whatever reason, you can get your GED, your general education degree, which means a test that means you know 2/3 of what a high school graduate was expected to have learned. And then you can go on to college. We use college and university interchangeably because some of them are colleges and some of them are universities, but we don't refer to the whole thing as university in the way that the British might like say, you go to hospital without the preposition in it, you go to university. But we also have what community colleges, which are, I don't want to say more casual, but they're less expensive and less rigorous also is not exactly right. But if you were looking for like VOTEC, so for vocational training and things like that, like a community college, and then you get your 4-year universities and then your graduate school if you're going for some kind of degree. And grade refers to either the year you're in or the letter evaluation that you received. And I think that should be everything you need to know about the layout of the American education system. Feel free to cut that entire segment out because I don't know how interesting it's going to be for people.
I'm going to keep that and I'm going to play it at the start of this show and right at the end as well. And then I'm going to have it on every show I ever do ever. I'm going to pop that at the end just for you.
Okay, now quid pro quo, Clarice.
Do you want to hear about the English school system? Please
help me to understand for the first time ever.
Okay, right. So we go into school when you're 4 or 5 years old. That's called reception, which is basically kindergarten, to my knowledge. Then we call them years, not grades. So year 1 and year 2, that is infant school. Then year 3, 4, 5, and 6, that is then that is secondary school. But infant school is sometimes in secondary school as well, just to make things more confusing. Oh wait, no, I've completely messed it up. I've already messed it up. You asked me. Right,
and also, what is grammar school?
Grammar school, I don't know. I'm not that. So I messed that up. Let's try again. Very simply, year R, reception, up to year 6. So from the age of 4 to about 10 or 11, that is primary school. Then when you're 11, you go to secondary school. Secondary school is year 7 to year 11. In year 10 or 11, you do your GCSEs. And it's normally English, math, science, and then you get to choose a couple of other ones. And then that finishes, when you finish year 11, you're 16 years old. Then you go into college, which is, and now a lot of the colleges are called academies, which makes things even more confusing. College is for generally 2 years. That's where you get A levels. So when you're 16 to 18, you could choose normally 4 subjects to do, and you get an A level for doing 2 years of each of them. And then when you're 18, you can go to university. You can go to university at any age, and I think you can go to college at any age in America.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can then go to university, and yeah, university is normally 3 years for like a standard degree, and then additional for depending on what field you want to go into. So really simply, primary, secondary, college, university. Primary, 4 to 10/11. Secondary, 11 to 16. College, 16 to 18. Uni, anything past there. Good. I was going to say an O level was what GCSEs used to be called decades ago, which is probably why if you watch certain British sitcoms or things that are in the 80s, 90s, they'll call them O levels, and then I think around that time it changed to GCSE.
Okay. And are you still allowed to leave school at 16?
What it used to be you can leave school at 16 and do whatever on earth you want, but now it's a case of when you leave at 16, I think you have to do either college or an apprenticeship. And an apprenticeship is, I did an apprenticeship, it's basically doing work, but you work for almost nothing, and 1 day a week you have to go to college, essentially, and get a qualification. The qualification I got is the equivalent to 3 or 4 A levels. But I did my apprenticeship after college, so.
So you just went back and got it just for shits and giggles?
Well, essentially, I finished college and didn't know what I wanted to do. I went into college and I was like, I want to be an accountant. And I did accounting for a year and I was like, I can't do this. Not necessarily because I wasn't smart enough, although that was probably a factor, but I had a lot of stuff going on in my life, and the world's most boring subject wasn't really for me. So
you should go back and become a forensic accountant.
Oh, no, thank you.
Because that's the thing. Oh, you can find all the rich guys where they're hiding their money, and then rat them out.
Oh, well, I mean, that does sound like a bit of fun, but it does sound a bit too number crunchy for me. I mean, I'm one of those people where I finished college and I was like, I don't really know what to do with myself. So I just found an apprenticeship, and what do you like doing? And I was like, I have a YouTube channel, which I don't anymore, but I do now for the podcast, but I had like a proper video YouTube channel. And I was like, I make music videos for bands for fun sometimes. I did media and I quite enjoyed that in college. And they're like, oh, so you can use Photoshop. You can do this graphic design-y job. And I did that for a while, and then now I'm in insurance. So there's no sense.
So we were headed to chartered accountant. We went through graphic design and landed on insurance.
Exactly. And the graphic design I did was in a cassette, yes, a tape cassette and CD production company. This was only a few years ago, and they're still going because a mate of mine still works there. Small company, but I did the graphic design for, so I was also doing a bit of audio production as well. So people would send me music and I'd burn it onto a CD and have to make a master CD and sometimes burn them onto a cassette tape and do cassette decks and stuff like that. So it was quite weird that when I decided to get into podcasting, I was like, well, I already know about graphic design. I know about audio stuff. I know about editing because of my YouTube days. So it kind of fit together very nicely.
Mesh them all together and you end up with a podcast.
Exactly. Yeah. It's one of those. But I just realized I've been talking about myself for ages. And I know you did ask, to be fair, but I want to ask more about you. Because let's flipping it right back, a nice big segue. You got struck by lightning ages ago.
Just the once.
Well, yeah, it's still it's quite a rare thing to happen to people. So I wonder if you could retell the story. And the thing that I'm most intrigued by is actually how it felt, if you can remember. I don't know what happens when people get struck by lightning apart from electricity.
Well, I used to raise goats and make goat milk soap and skincare products that I would sell at farmers markets and craft shows and things. And that was how I earned my living for about 11 years. And one very warm May afternoon, the sky just opened up. And what I learned in my years of milking the goats was if I try to do chores early to avoid the rain, if I try to do them late to avoid the rain, I will always end up in the heaviest part of the rain. So I might as well just stick to the schedule, and whatever happens, happens. So it's raining very hard, and I'm yelling at a goat named Cyanide, trying to get her to come out of the barn, because I had a different theme each year when I named the baby goats. And one year it was deadly poisons. So I had kept goats named Cyanide, Strychnine, and Antimony. So I'm yelling at Cyan to try to get her to come out of the barn. I'm standing there with my hand on the fence, like you do. And there was a crack. The loudest sound I've ever heard. Sounded like it was 3 feet above my head. And as I was falling into the mud, I had 3 distinct thoughts in an instant. Stupid electric fence. I haven't had the electric fence on in weeks. I think I've just been struck by lightning. I might have lost consciousness very briefly, like, a few seconds, not any real length of time. Couldn't close the hand that had been on the fence. It was just kind of stuck, kung fu grip, half open position. And I'm like, you know what? You can just get mastitis. I don't care anymore. I'm going, screw you guys. I'm going home. So I'm going in the house. My, at that moment, estranged, now ex-husband had been over at the house, actually, at that exact moment, showing a friend of ours something. And I'm like, oh, he can never turn off the laundry room light. And then I noticed that the light was wavy and orange because the bolt of lightning had hit the house, lit it on fire, and then dissipated out through the ground to where I had been standing with my hand on the fence. So I've just been struck by lightning, and my house is trying to burn down. So not like the most stellar afternoon. It wasn't even our first fire either. The other one, I believe, was caused by a 15-year-old Himalayan cat who decided that she wanted to be where the oil lamp was. So the oil lamp had to go. But yeah, I couldn't do math. I couldn't do even basic arithmetic in my head for a couple of weeks. I don't remember much in terms of pain apart from a really significant, the pins and needles you get in a pinched limb before the full pins and needles have set in. Like that medium, oh, here it comes, this is going to suck sensation was what I had in my hand. But logic was also real difficult for me for the first few weeks, which is great when you have to deal with your homeowner's insurance and moving your business into an apartment so that you can, have food and stuff, and I still have to drive back to the farm twice a day to milk the goats. And for the first couple of weeks, also carry buckets of water because the water had been turned off on the property. So, I had like a workshop full of stuff and an empty U-Haul truck. And I just kept looking back and forth between the full workshop of equipment and the empty U-Haul truck. And I couldn't figure out what was supposed to happen next. And I just stood there looking back and forth, trying to reason it out. And one of my helpers was like, do you want us to start with the boxes or the racks? I'm like, yes, put the things from the workshop into the truck. That's what we're doing. Okay, good. Yes, that, please. So it took a couple of weeks for all of that to come back. And to this day, that's what I credit my poor memory to. It's especially bad right now because I'm also going into menopause early. And of course, I'm blonde. So I'll get halfway through like a really interesting fact and then just come to a dead screeching stop because I can't remember the end of it, or I'm no longer sure about what I was saying. I'm like, wait, was that World War I or World War II? Was this person French or Spanish? And like, now I don't even know what I was talking about anymore, But I will say though, that when you tell people that you've been struck by lightning after you forget or fumble something, their expectations for you diminish. It's like, people just don't expect much out of you after you tell them you've been struck by lightning. And in that, it's very freeing.
Out of interest, did you, apart from the memory, did you find, no, it's not the same, but when people have sort of blunt head trauma, they can have a personality change. Did you have anything like that happen, or was it, to your knowledge, did it only seem like the sort of memory and logic basis?
No, I'm just as annoying as I ever was. That's remained pretty consistent. But I mean, our brains are just a fatty sponge of hormones and sparks, and it doesn't take much to damage us and to alter us, because you'll hear these interesting things about people who had a brain injury or were in a coma or whatever, and who come back with an accent I've never
heard
had,
of this,
or no longer speaking their native language but completely fluent in another language. Or there was a story I was listening to on, I think it was the Box of Oddities podcast, of a little girl who like a toddler fell down the stairs and died but was resuscitated, but she came back with all of the memories of an adult woman who lived in Egypt under Seti I. So they took her to temples and she knew what all the illustrations were. She could read the cartouches, and she was like 5.
That's insane.
And then you get stories like Phineas Gage, who was working on the railroads here in America in like the late 1900s. They were putting explosives in the ground. You dig a hole, you put some explosive medium in there, and then you tamp it down with a big rod, which for whatever reason, he leaned over the tamping rod while he was working, and one of the strikes ignited the explosive, which shot this like 5-6 foot long metal spike through his skull, went under his chin and came out the top of his head, which not only did he survive, but he was mostly okay. However, later in his life, his personality seemed to change, and he would vary between kind of the Phineas Gage that everyone knew and this aggressive and incorrigible sort of person. He also toured for a time with the spike, because it's hard to make a living otherwise, but he, like a number of people who tried to make a living on the sideshow circuit, he wasn't great with the showmanship of it. So it didn't end up making a good career for him. Like the first person to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel, which was an older woman who had not fulfilled her dream of being a dance teacher because the city she moved to didn't have any dance schools. So she thought a great way to secure her financial future would be to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel. It's a little disconnect in my head on that one. It's sort of phase 1 steal underpants, phase 3 profit. But hey, luckily for her, it worked out, because the woman who had tried it just prior to her had died because she took her dog with her, and her dog stuck his nose over the only air hole and smothered her.
People, they're insane.
Yeah, so step 1, don't take your dog. But she had like the barrel that she had been in, this like 5 foot tall custom made pickle barrel, but she was apparently such a boring speaker that nobody wanted to turn up to hear the story of how she survived. going over Niagara Falls in a barrel because she was just so dull. So, you know,
Wow.
you needed showmanship back in those days.
Yeah, and I think with sort of the barrel thing, I think, have there been multiple people attempting to throw themselves over Niagara Falls in barrels?
It still happens. People try to go over on jet skis and homemade contraptions, and I believe there's actually a Coast Guard installation there to get people out of the river before they try to go over. And there was a man who went over in a custom-made metal tube who died later after slipping on an orange peel. And I think he suffered a broken bone that then became gangrenous and infected. So he survived going over Niagara Falls, and he slipped on an orange peel and subsequently died.
That's like Final Destination, basically. It's just like you avoided death in one way, now get the worst way.
Yeah, now you'll get the more embarrassing death. Well, like, you know, Jack Daniels, the whiskey guy, he died of septicemia after breaking his toe kicking his safe. I assume because he couldn't get it open. And he kicked it out of in a fit of pique, broke his toe, it got infected, and he died. Wow.
People never cease to astound me. I mean, there's a couple of museums around. I would imagine there's maybe one in America. Ripley's, believe it or not.
Oh, we've got oodles and scads of them. Yeah.
Yeah, we got I think one or two in England. But I saw my first one.
We've got a lot more ground to cover.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's mental. Also, one mental thing I find with America and the weird thing is Australia is that even though Australia, obviously, there's a lot of unlivable place in there. Australia
90% of it.
Well, yeah, exactly. Australia is basically like landmass size is the same as the United States. It's very, very, very similar. But yeah, when you see it on a map or even in my own mind, Australia seems small. But that's obviously because it's almost like a donut of where you could live because the middle's just uninhabitable.
And the Mercator projection, of course, screws up the scale of everything. And it's not really near. It's not as close to anything to help establish the scale because it's off by itself on the ass end of the planet. And I say that because I have a sister who lives there. But yeah, there's just the candy coating is the only place where you can live, well, at least for non-Indigenous people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you know that the Aboriginals didn't get the right to vote until 1968?
I did not know that. No.
I just like to lord that over my Australian brother-in-law anytime he starts to get mouthy about American and the Native Americans. Like, yeah, we did some shit, but we tended to stop before television came along. You know?
It was one thing that I try not to argue with people too often, although sometimes it is inevitable. When I was younger, I used to always argue with everyone about everything. Now I'm kind of learned to pick my battles a bit more. But one of the arguments I like to use with people is when it comes to cannabis legalization, which the whole drug war thing is a very big, massive conversation that I don't want to delve into, but cannabis in itself is like, you know, obviously in America, you guys, there's lots of different states which have got it for medicinal or recreational or whatever. And there's people that I know who are very, you know, anti-drugs and anti-cannabis and whatever, but then also drink loads. And then I query and I go, okay, well, what? Yeah, what? And they go, well, it's illegal. And I go, yeah, but in England, it was illegal to be gay until like 1967. Yeah.
1967, yeah.
So, and I was like, so in that, I know it's not an easy just, it's that simple, end of the argument. But it's one of those things where it's just, and that fact, I only found that out when I had a friend of mine who's gay, and he was telling me about it and telling me what it was like to grow up in the 80s as gay and the language of the theatrical rhyming slang Polari.
Polari.
Yeah.
I love Polari. I covered it on the podcast twice. It's in the book. I love Polari. Well,
it's
for one thing, it's got Yiddish in it, and I love Yiddish. Yiddish is the best language for expressing oneself. But yeah, it's this amazing hodgepodge. For the gentle listener who doesn't know, Polari is a blend of thieves' cant and sailor slang, Yiddish, Italian, theater slang. It varied a little bit regionally depending on if you were in like the West End of London where you were near the theaters or the East End when you're near the docks. But it was a secret language that gay men could use to talk to one another. You never hear whether or not lesbians used it, but lesbians always kind of got more of a pass on things just historically. But that way gay men could speak to one another without revealing that they were gay, either to those who could overhear them, or if you thought the guy you were trying to pick up was gay but he wasn't, you could just brush off whatever you had said that, you know, he clearly didn't understand what you said, so you know he's not gay. But then a lot of it came to common usage through Around the Horn and the characters Julian and Sandy, in their sketches there was lots and lots of Polari, and then people came to understand it, and that was just before homosexuality was decriminalized anyway, and then Polari was no longer needed and fell by the wayside. But we still have a lot of Polari, and it even came over to American English, things like camp, though camp means a little bit more kitsch than it means gay, but there's still that kind of John Waters overlap area. Butch, drag, zhuzh, all the stuff you hear on RuPaul's Drag Race and things, and Queer Eye for the Straight Guy.
RuPaul, so I've seen lots and lots of series of RuPaul's Drag Race. Yeah,
so all those kinds of words are Polari.
Yeah, and it's mental because when I was speaking with the gentleman was called Steve, and he's a friend of my sister-in-law's. I've known him for over 10 years, and obviously when I was younger, I had that sort of naivety where it didn't really register with me about. It is one of those things I've said before the podcast where I didn't even realise racism was a thing until I saw an episode of That's So Raven when I was about 8, because I went to a school which had people of colour in it, so I was like, oh, there's people with different colour skin. Cool. And then I had to get taught that racism was a thing. And it was the same with, homophobia, because until secondary school, I didn't know. Around secondary school is when I met this gentleman, Steve. And then also there's more, obviously when you go to secondary school, so you're 11 to 16, that's when people start finding themselves sexually. So when people are gay, it's more obvious and things like that. Or they come out and stuff. And so that was another thing where I was like, wait a minute. People actually have a problem with this, and then you find out more and you're like, oh no. You go further in history, like, oh no. And there's like crimes.
It's really pretty bad.
It's pretty horrendous. Like the world today has got a huge amount of problems, but it's like we are getting better, which is for the most part, we are getting better, which does give me that little bit of optimism of just like things look really bad, and in a lot of ways they are. But if you go back 50 years, they were a lot worse in a lot of ways.
Worse. Yeah, my mother is in her late 60s, and growing up in Florida, there were white only and black only facilities, and there was a particular manufacturer of water fountains, and Ensco or something is written on the top of the handle, and my mother had thought that word meant whites only because there was this little word on the top of the water fountain handle, so she assumed that meant whites only. Until after desegregation, and she still saw that word on the handle of the water fountains, and she realized, oh, I guess it doesn't mean whites only. Yeah. She wasn't, of course, pro segregation. She was
of course
7, not actively involved in perpetuating it. And yeah, so with the racism, the homophobia, the attitude toward marijuana, society is changing its views. And if those of us who are progressing can just keep progressing, all we have to do is keep progressing and wait for the dinosaurs to die out.
And that's the end of part 1. Thanks as always for tuning in, guys. Part 2 will be out next week at the usual time. And some of the subjects we talk about in part 2 include Moxie's Game of Thrones Nerdlesque, which is a burlesque show, but obviously nerdy, and her story of playing in front of the man, George R.R. Martin himself. We speak about Star Wars a little bit, including George Lucas's ex-wife Martha. We speak about Avatar The Last Airbender a little bit, but there's no spoilers because I haven't actually seen the full thing. We speak about voice acting, podcasting equipment elitism, Confederate statues, and a few other things as well. Very similar feel to how the start of this podcast was. This part 1, where it's a tangential talk where we speak about loads of different things, coming off on tangents here, there, and everywhere. So be sure to tune in next week for that, and make sure you check out Moxie's Your Brain on Facts podcast because it is excellent. And if you really like it, make sure you go buy her book too. I said in the intro that I've basically appeared on Max's Mandatory Marvel and DC show. If anyone has been following the show for a little bit, you'll know my other show, Star Wars Comics in Canon, is on the Comics in Motion feed, as well as a load of other podcasts, including people who've come on this podcast before as guests, and the others that haven't will be guests in the future. So the podcast, as I said, is about Batman the Killing Joke, which is a very popular Batman graphic novel about a Joker origin story. If that kind of thing sounds interesting to you, make sure you check out episode 8 of Mandatory Marvel and DC, found on the feed of Comics in Motion. So it's very easy to find, but I've also included a link in the description. I recently appeared on Tony Freina's Indie Comic Spotlight to talk about the series' second coming as well. That was on episode 13, I believe. That is also on the feed of Comics in Motion. And I also did my voice acting debut on the first episode of season 2 of the Room podcast, episode called All Roads Lead to Room. I've got a slightly smaller role there. And then I was also in the second to last episode, which is called Jen and the Blob. I voiced the Blob. It was a lot of fun to do. Get to mess around with some of my better impressions of voice acting and things, so you can check those out. I've included a link to those in the description too. Coming out, obviously next week is going to be part 2 of my chat with Moxie. I've got a chat recording on Tuesday with a very good friend of mine called Sean. He is Welsh, he's a great laugh, and I love chatting to him just in real life, and because he lives in Wales, along with my mate Alex Hart and a couple of other friends of mine, I would normally go up to Wales and see them. Because of the lockdown, obviously been in England for 3 or so months, haven't been able to, so we're going to chat over a podcast anyway. It's going to be a lot kind of like this chat in a sense. It's probably going to be loads of tangents and loads of things, but I'm incredibly comfortable with Sean, so the conversation is going to flow great. Obviously, this chat with Moxie went really well, and I'm happy it flowed too, but I just want to clarify that the week after next, when I have Sean on, it's not going to be a really, really serious chat. It's going to be probably full of laughs and things like that. Also coming up, I did a collaboration with a gentleman called Scott Weatherly of the 20th Century Geek podcast. When there was the big Star Wars collaboration, myself, Chris and Dave and Scott did before Christmas this year in the run-up to The Rise of Skywalker. I appeared on Comics in Motion, as well as the 20th Century Geek podcast, and they came on my show, and we had big Star Wars discussions about the originals, prequels, sequel trilogy, and then predictions for Rise of Skywalker, as well as a video about our thoughts on The Rise of Skywalker. So you may have already heard Scott Weatherly's voice, or if you're following a lot of the podcasts that often collaborate with each other, you may have listened to 20th Century Geek before. If you haven't, go check it out, because Scott's going to be coming on the show in the coming weeks or so, in the coming months. I can't exactly guarantee when the episode will be out, but I am excited about that too. I've got the episode recorded with Paul and Emily of Parent Guide to GCSE. I'm going to record that, release that probably in August, because I've already got that recorded. And then I've got a couple of other things in the pipeline for recording too. So and a couple of returning guests and a few other things. So that's kind of what you can look forward to over the coming weeks from Genuine Chit-Chat. And the only other thing really to talk about is Star Wars Comics and Canon. If you haven't already checked out the show and you're into Star Wars in any capacity, I really recommend you go check it out. The episodes I aim to be between sort of anywhere between 15 minutes and 40 minutes. I don't think many have been longer than that. They're generally just me talking about a select few of Star Wars comics that are in the new canon. The recent ones I've done about Darth Vader, about him between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, how he got Luke Skywalker's name after he blew up the Death Star. I've done ones about Kylo Ren, Captain Phasma, and things like that of the sequels. I've done the Princess Leia comic. I'm soon to do the Lando comic. So I've also done the Obi-Wan and Anakin comic from the prequels. I've done bits and pieces here, there, and everywhere. I'm doing ongoing series at the moment, as well as one-shot comics and mini-series. Next week is probably going to be the series about Mace Windu. That's quite interesting. So there's lots of different things that you can really get your teeth into. It's not specifically meant for someone who's a massive Star Wars fan or anyone who's not much of a Star Wars fan. It's just if you've seen the main 6 movies, as well as, you should have really seen Force Awakens and Last Jedi. If you've seen them and you kind of want to get more into the wider Star Wars realm, if maybe you've watched a bit of Clone Wars and Rebels or Mandalorian or anything, and you like the comics and things, but you aren't interested enough to spend loads of money and time reading through all the comics and the books and the this and the that, Star Wars Comics and Canon is a good way to kind of get you into the wider canon, just explaining storylines, way things connect, a bit of added depth to certain characters. The Princess Leia comic I spoke about last week or week before last, in the comic, it tells you how Nyan Nub got into the rebellion. He's in Return of the Jedi. He's Lando's co-pilot when he's flying the Millennium Falcon into the Death Star 2. He's a Celestian. You know who he was if you've seen the Star Wars films. Megan personally hates him because he's so weird looking and sounds quite peculiar. But those are the kind of things you can look forward to in Star Wars Comics and Canon. It's good for any beginners or anyone who has been in the Star Wars realm for a long time. it's just something I'm passionate about doing, and it's just me talking to myself, essentially. Kind of like the end of these podcasts are, full of rambling, but it's almost purely Star Wars related. So if you want to check that out, that is in the Comics in Motion feed. There's also a link to it in the description, and wherever you're listening to this podcast, you should be able to find the episodes on there as well, except I do not believe Comics in Motion is on YouTube, so if you're listening to this on YouTube, you're probably going to have to find it elsewhere, I'm afraid. Anyway, that's it for me, guys. Not going to ramble on too much here. Really hope you guys enjoyed the chat. As I said, make sure you check out Moxie's podcast, Your Brain on Facts, and give her a cheeky pre-order of her book, or if it's within a few days of this coming out, you'll then be able to buy the book. Buy it as well. Yeah, that's it from me, guys. Really appreciate you guys listening. Subscribe on all the usual places, follow on all the usual social media channels, and leave reviews if you believe the show deserves it. Thanks again, guys, and I'll talk to all of you next week.